Hello and welcome. I'm Adam with Push the Envelope, the channel that gives you everything artificial intelligence and machine learning. Today we are continuing on with the Python Bootcamp, looking at what are functions. Now, functions are again one of the more fundamental things within Python. They allow you to repeatedly use some code, large chunks, and call them very easily. So without further ado, let's jump over to the Jupyter Notebook, look at how do we define functions and how do we actually use them throughout our code. Alright, Jupyter is up and running. As you can see, we have our template up. If you have not been following along with the rest of these tutorials, the rest of the bootcamp, I do have the GitHub link at the very top. That's where you can find all of these templates and all of the solutions as well. What I will say is if you are new to Python or new to coding in general, I would recommend going back and looking at those tutorials to learn what are if statements, what are for loops, what are variables, all of the key things that we're going to be using within inside of these functions. But assuming you've already watched those or you already have some sort of understanding, let's go ahead and jump in. We have two sections we're going to be covering. First, just going over the basics of how do we define the functions, and then going through multiple examples and really hitting home of how to use these functions and how to put it all together with the other things we've been learning. So, without further ado, let's jump in. Functions. Defining a function. Now, function is called by using this keyword def for definition, followed by whatever your function name is, and you can make up whatever name you want it to be. So I'm going to say define, I'm just going to call it my function. Okay, and then it's going to be followed by parentheses. We're just going to do an open and close one, not put anything in it for now. Followed by a colon. Now, if you remember using if statements, for loops, anything you want in this function needs to be indented under it. So add that indent, and then this is where you're going to put the code that the function stores. So for now, I'm just going to do a simple print hello world. I can spell hello right. And this may not be the best example because print hello world is only one line, but basically what you can do is call this function. To call the function, give it your function name. I called it my function in this case. And then pass those open and close parentheses. If I call this, you can see hello world was printed to the screen. Now, the benefit of using functions is I can take this statement and I can just keep printing it out. So I've now printed hello world 4 times to the screen just by calling the function name. Let me delete some of those. I can change up what my function is doing now. So instead, maybe I want to print out 20 times 30. If I call that, it's going to give me 600. And if I keep calling that like I did before, adding in a few more here, you can see it's just going to keep doing that math, printing it to the screen. So that's how you define functions. Let's get into a little more complex stuff, like adding in input variables, which is the first key thing to using functions. Okay, if you remember our definition before, we had def, some sort of function name. So I'm going to call this one print greeting. Now, we had the open and close parenthesis followed by a colon. In order to add inputs, you're going to be passing those into those open and close parentheses. So I'm going to pass in somebody's name, and I'm just going to call it name. Again, these variables, you don't have to, it doesn't have to match what you're passing it. I could call this string, or I could call this something else. It's just some way to store the thing that you're passing in. So I'm going to be passing in the person's name, and now instead of just printing hello world, I'm going to be printing hello, comma, the name. Alright, let's see how we can call this. So if I have my print greeting function, and let's just pass it in my name. So I'm going to print hello Adam. Run that, and you can see name Adam is passed in where the name is, and we're printing that to the screen. Now, the cool thing about this is I can keep passing those in, but now I'm just going to change up the name. So I'm going to have Tom, and maybe I have Karen as well. If I run that, you can see hello Adam, hello Tom, hello Karen. So using the same function over and over again, but we're just changing the variable that we're passing to it. Like we did before, we can also use this with numbers. So if I just define a new function, actually, I'm going to say find the sum. I'm just going to pass it x1 and x2. Again, variable names don't matter, but if you have multiple inputs that you're passing, just separate them with a comma. And now I'm just going to be printing x1 plus x2. Now if I call find sum, and I pass it, I don't know, 2 and 3. Again, if you have 2 inputs or more, separate those with a comma. But when I do that, it will print out the sum of those two. And again, I can keep calling this with different values. Maybe I want 5 and 6 now. You can see it will just keep printing those out. Okay, so that covers how do we use inputs. Let's look at how do we use outputs now. So not only can we pass things into the function, we can pass things out of the function. So define our function. So I have the same one we had before. So I'm going to have this get greeting function. I'm going to be passing it in somebody's name. Now, instead of printing something to the screen, I'm just going to use the return function. So type out return. And I'm actually just going to say hello, comma, and then add the name to it. So I'm just going to, same thing we had before. So hello, Adam, if I was to pass it my name. Now, the difference between printing and returning is the return is going to pass back this string to the main function. So if before we had get greeting and I passed it in my name, it was going to print that out to the screen. Instead, what it's going to do is it's going to pass it back so you can store it as a variable. So if I have greeting as my variable, I'm going to set that equal to the function, and the function is going to return that string and store it as greeting. So I can print greeting afterwards. And you can see it was sent back to greeting, and then we're printing greeting and it says hello Adam. I can change the name. Maybe I have Tom in this case, and there you go. Now I could also, if I wanted to, just print the function. So get greeting, and maybe this last one will be Karen. What this is going to do is it's going to pass back the value of the string, but it's going to immediately print that to the screen. So you can print out that function. Like before, where we were using different numbers, I can have find the product now maybe of x1 and x2. I'm going to return. Actually, what I could do instead, inside of functions, you can define new variables. So if I have something called result in this case, and I want my result to be x1 times x2, and then I can just return the result. That's another way of doing it if I want to store some values within a variable first before I return them to the screen, or use them in another case. Now, something important here is even though you can define these variables within the function, you will not be able to use them outside of the functions. They're only going to live within the function. This isn't necessarily the case when you're using Jupyter Lab or Jupyter Notebook, because if I store these values as result will be stored in cache, and so you will be able to reference them outside of it. But it's not good practice to do that. You definitely want to return them to the screen, and this also will not work if you're writing a normal Python script on the command line, let's say. Okay, all those disclaimers out of the way, let's call our function here. So find product, and let's say 3 times 4. Now, we are going to be returning something to the screen. So I'm just going to call it result again. Even though it's the same value, it doesn't really matter because, again, this result only lives within the function. So I'm going to print my result to the screen. You can see 3 times 4 is 12. If I change this to 4 times 4, you got 16. All right. Now let's look at a little more complex and looking at how can we use our if statements within these functions. So maybe I want to compare some values within the function and return one thing if it's true or another thing if it's false. For instance, if I have the same get greeting that we've been using, I'm going to pass it in the person's name, but I'm also going to pass it in what time of day it is. What I really want to do is, if it's the morning, I want to print out good morning, whatever the person's name is. But if it's not the morning, then I want to say good afternoon. So I'm going to say if time of day, remember this is an if statement, so it's looking for a condition. So if time of day equals morning, if you remember back to using conditions and if statements, equals is going to be this double equal sign right here. So if the time of day equals morning, we are going to be returning good morning, followed by the person's name. If it's not, we're going to be using the else statement here. So for anything else, I'm going to copy our return statement, move it down, but I'm going to change morning to be afternoon. When I call get greeting, I'm going to be passing it in my name. And let's say it is the morning. Okay, now since we're using a return, again, we either need to store this as a variable or we can just print the function call. So I'm just going to print the function call and make it a little easier. Scrolling down, you can see, okay, we passed it in morning. It does say good morning, Adam. If I pass it in afternoon, it will say good afternoon. If I pass it in evening, it will say good afternoon. That's because we did not add the value of evening, so it's just going to default to good afternoon if it's not the morning. All right, same thing. We can define a function called find max. It's going to take those same x1 and x2s. It's going to say if x1 is greater than x2, that means that x1 is the greatest value. So I'm going to return x1. If it's not, so else, I'm going to return x2. So this either means that x2 is greater than x1 or they're equal to each other. Either way, it will cover those statements. So now if I have max value is equal to find max, and I'm going to pass it in two values. Maybe I have 3 and 6. And I print out max value to the screen. You can see it will pass me 6 as the max value. If I have 9 and 6, it will pass me 9. If I have 9 and 9, it will pass me 9 because they're equal to each other. Okay. Again, moving up in complexity as we go through defining these functions. Last thing about defining functions is you can call functions within inside of other functions. You can really increase the complexity of what you can do in the function by adding in other functions and making some super function that has a whole bunch of other function calls within it. Okay, let's continue on with our greeting example. So now I'm going to define a new function called get time of day. Time of day is going to take the time in 24-hour notation. So I'm just going to pass it in the time. Now I'm going to say if the time is less than noon, which is 1200, we are going to return morning. Else, we are going to return afternoon. So this is looking at the time of day, automatically calculating whether or not it's the morning or afternoon. Now we can go ahead and define our get greeting again. So I have our get greeting. I'm going to be passing in someone's name, and now instead of time of day, I'm going to be passing, instead of time of day, I'm going to be passing in the actual time in 24-hour notation, and we're going to be calculating the time of day. So very first thing I will do in this function is calculate that time of day by calling the first function. So get time of day, and I'm going to be passing it in the time that it's looking for. Now, as you can see, we passed in the time to the second function, and that's going to be passed into the first function by calling it. All right, that will give us our time of day. Now we can do, we have some greeting. So our greeting is going to be equal to good plus whatever the time of day is, plus a comma, plus the person's name. So this is just string math, putting it all together with the spaces that where they need to go, but we're just going to return that greeting to the screen. If I call this, now I want to be sure that I'm calling the second one. You can call the first one, but the first one's only going to give you morning or afternoon. If I call the second one, it's going to be calling both of them together. So I'm going to have some greeting, and it's going to be equal to get greeting, passing it in my name, and passing in the time of day. So let's say it is 11 o'clock. I'm going to be printing the greeting to the screen so we can see what is returned. And you can see it says, good morning, Adam. 11 is morning. Let's go switch this to 1500 maybe. Now we're at good afternoon. So again, calling functions within other functions is a way of increasing the complexity, but also keeping the amount of code within one function down as well, and reusing it a lot. Last thing I'll show before we start working through the examples is I can return multiple things to the screen. So if I wanted to return the actual greeting, and maybe I also wanted to return the person's name, I could do a comma name. This is going to return both the greeting and the name. Now when I print this, you can see this is going to be something called a tuple. A tuple is in the parentheses right here. It's going to be the first value, comma, the second value. And if I wanted to only get the greeting, I could say the greeting at 0. And if I only wanted to get the name, I could say the name at 1. The greeting at 1. That would get the second part of the tuple. But what you could also do is just store those as two different variables. So in the outside, maybe I have greeting and name is equal to get greeting. That's going to store greeting as the first variable and name as the second variable. So I can print both of those individually now. Lastly, what we can do is we can define, we can set time to have a default. So if I don't provide a time, let's say I want it to be 10 o'clock as the default. What does this do? Well, let me get rid of the second part here. If I go ahead and run this, 1500 is the afternoon, it will print the afternoon. And same thing, 0800 or 8 o'clock will be good morning. Now, if I don't pass this a time, and I just pass it the name, what it's going to do is it's going to store the name as name, and then time was not passed, so it's automatically going to make this 10 o'clock. So if I run this, it will automatically pass 10 o'clock into get time of day, it will be morning, and pass good morning, Adam. Okay, with all that out of the way, and I know it's going to be a lot for those of you who've never used functions before, let's go ahead and work through examples, because that's going to be the best way for you to start learning how to do this. And if you haven't been following along with the series, you're going to get the most out of this if you take the time and actually try to solve these on your own and then come back and listen to how I was able to do it. So take 5-10 minutes on each of these, see what you can come up with, see if you're able to solve it, come back and compare it to what I'm able to do. All right, let's start it. First thing, I want you to define a function. It's going to have 3 inputs, the last, the first, and the rank of a person. I want you to take all of those and print to the screen the person's name, but I want the person's name to be rank first last, reporting for duty. So go ahead, take those 3 inputs, print this statement to the screen, see what you can come up with, take some time, and then come back and we will work through this together. Okay, assuming you did that, let's go ahead and get started. So I'm going to get started by defining our function, reporting for duty. This is going to take a last name, a first name, and a rank. And it's going to be printing. Actually, instead of printing, I'm just going to define a new variable called name. And name is going to be equal to rank plus a space plus the person's first name plus a space plus the person's last name. Just putting this all in order with spaces in between each of these. All right, now that we have the name, we're going to print a function or print a statement that says name reporting as a string reporting for duty. Okay, let's go ahead and test this. So I'm going to call reporting for duty. It's going to take 3 things in. So let's say last name of Michael's, I don't know, Philip. And the rank will be captain. Okay, if I call this, you can see it's reordering it. So Captain Philip Michaels reporting for duty. And that's exactly what we want to do. We could change these around if we wanted to. Maybe instead of Philip, it's Claire or something. You can see it'll change it around. Okay, hopefully you were able to get that. If not, don't worry. We have a ton of examples to go through. You'll get it as we keep going. Let's look at the next one. So I want you to define a function to figure out if a person can vote or not. So the function is going to take in the person's age, and then it's going to output whether or not they can vote as a bool. And if you remember, a bool is a true or a false value. Now, a person will be able to vote if they are 18 or older, so that's what you're going to be using for your comparison. Go ahead, try to define that function, come back, and we will work through it. Okay, to define the function, we're going to be calling it can I vote. It's going to be taking in someone's age. Now, we're going to be using a comparison, so that's going to be an if statement. If the age is greater than or equal to 18, we're going to be returning true. And if it's not, so or else, we'll be returning false. Now, if I call this down below, can I vote? Let's pass in 17. Now, since we're returning something, we need to store this. So I'm going to make a variable called can vote, set it equal to our function call. And then I'm just going to print out can vote to the screen. All right, 17-year-old cannot vote, 18-year-old can, and 101-year-old also can as well. Awesome. Again, these are fairly simple. We're going to keep working through these, but we're going to slowly increase in complexity as we go through. Next one, we're going to see if two people agree or disagree. So we're going to be defining a function. It's going to be taking in two strings, so two statements. And I want you to compare if the two statements are equal to each other. If they are, print out you agree. If not, print out you disagree. See what you can come up with and come back. Okay, defining our function, we're going to be calling it agree or disagree. And this is going to take in string 1 and string 2. We're going to be using a comparison, so our if statement is going to be used. If string 1 equals, a double equals is for comparing to. If string 1 equals string 2, we are going to be printing out our you agree message. If not, this is going to be our else statement. We're going to be printing out you disagree. Testing this out, I'm going to call agree or disagree. Maybe I have yes as the first statement and yes as the second statement. Obviously, these two are the same. It will print out you agree. If I change maybe the second one to be no, it will say you disagree. Now, one thing to be careful of is if I have a capital yes as the second one, it will also say you disagree because it's looking very literally at these strings. In the future, we'll cover how do we change these strings to be equal to each other, but for now, just know that capitalization will throw you off. All right, like I said, continuing to move up in complexity. Now we're getting a little more advanced here. We're going to be, if you were watching the previous videos, I believe the if statements, we were looking at how do we create some sort of tip calculator based on the service level. So I want you to make a function that gives the bill amount, so however much the bill was, and then I want you to give a service level. And the service level is going to be one of 4 strings. So it's going to be bad, okay, good, or great. And that service level is going to determine how much of a tip you're going to leave. So if you had bad service, you're only going to leave 10% tip. But what I want you to do, take that bill amount, take the service level, and return to the screen how much you should be tipping by taking the bill amount times the tip percent. Hopefully you're able to understand that, but see what you're able to do. Come back and we will work through it. Okay, define our function. We're going to say calc tip. That's going to be our function name. We're going to be taking a bill and we're going to be taking some service level. I'm going to call those bill and service. First thing we need to do is compare our service level to know how much of a tip we should be leaving. So I'm going to say if service equals bad, then we want our tip. So I'm just going to call this, tip is going to be equal to our bill times the value of 0.1, which is 10% up here, as you can see in this little chart. Now, as you can see, I'm storing this as a new variable called tip. I don't need to. I could just return straight from this if statement, but for now, I'm just going to keep tip all the way down to the very end. My elif statement is going to be used to check the next one if the service was not bad. So I'm going to be looking for the next one, which is okay. And my tip is going to be equal to the bill times 0.15. I have two more to check here, so I'm going to copy this elif statement down twice, but we're going to change these values. So the third one will be equal to good, and it's going to be the bill times 0.18. And the last one will be great, and it would be 22%. Now, something you should get used to using is, while these will cover all of our tips that I have labeled here, I'm just going to add an else statement as a catch-all to be if something went wrong, if I'm passing in an error, or if I passed in something that I wasn't expecting, so maybe I said excellent or something. I'm just going to default the tip to be 0.18. And then I'm going to return the tip to the screen. So if I use the function and I'm going to save the result as a variable called tip amount, but I'm going to calculate the tip on a bill of $44.68. And let's say my service level was just okay. I'm going to print tip amount to the screen. Okay, as you can see, it is $6.70. Now, if I wanted to round the tip, if you remember using the round function, I can say I want it to be 2 decimal places, at most 2 decimal places. So you can see $6.60. Now, if I change the service level to be great, you can see now our tip amount will be $9.83. If I change it one more time to excellent, it's just going to default to 0.18 because excellent is not one of our choices. So it's going to be $8.04. All right, hopefully you were able to follow that if you weren't able to get it on your own. But again, we're going to keep working through it. So something sort of similar. Let's look at what phase of life a person is based on their age. So define this function. It's going to take the person's age, and it's going to compare the person's age to these categories. So whether or not they're 0 to 3, 4 to 12, so on. But then I want you to print, so if in this case, if the age is between 0 and 3, you're going to print to the screen that this person is a baby. If they're between 20 and 64, they're an adult, and so on. Now, the one thing I want you to do is, if it's not any of those, so if the age is less than 0 or greater than 130, I want you to print out, hey, you entered an invalid age, just to alert the user that something went wrong. So go ahead, try that, and come on back. All right, defining the function, I'm going to call it life phases. Life phases is going to take the person's age. And now we're going to do a whole bunch of comparisons here. So I'm going to say if the age is greater than or equal to 0 and the age is less than or equal to 3. Remember, if we're using if statements and we have multiple conditions, and are going to be both have to be true. So it has to be greater than 0, greater than equal to 0, and less than equal to 3 in order for it to do the code below. If it is in that range, we're going to print baby. I'm going to copy this because we're going to be using this again and again. Now, instead of doing an if, though, I'm going to make this an elif. So the next condition, if it's not 0 and 3, let's check if it's 4 and 12. If it is, we're going to be making this child. Again, copying this down multiple times. So let's go 3 times. All right, our third condition is going to be 13 to 19. If it's 13 to 19, this will be a teenager, so passing back teen. And if it's 20 to 64, this will be our adult. And lastly, if it's 65 to 130, this is our senior citizen. Now, again, I'm using an else statement here for anything else. If it does not hit any of these, that means we have some sort of error. So I'm going to say invalid age entered. Let's go ahead and test this out. So I'm calling life phases as our function. I'm going to be passing in maybe 12. Okay. I forgot the S in phases. Okay. As you can see, 12-year-old is a child. Let's go with a 19-year-old, which is a teenager. A 66-year-old is a senior citizen. And let's go with a 131-year-old. Invalid age entered because we don't have anything greater than 130 within our if statements. So that does work out. Alrighty. Continuing down the list, let's look at figuring out someone's letter grade by 3 grades that they were given. So you're going to make a function. It's going to take in 3 grades. And those grades are going to be numbers, 0 to 100. So take those 3 grades and find the average grade and then convert that average grade to be the letter grade based on this category right here. So if the average grade is 0 to 59, that's going to be F and all these other ones as well. Similar to what we just did in the last one. Now, the one catch is if any of those grades that were passed in are less than 0 or greater than 100, don't calculate the average, but print out to the screen, hey, you entered an invalid grade, just to let them know that something went wrong. So go ahead, see what you can do there, and then come on back and we will work through it. Okay, defining our function. I'm going to call this get letter grade. And we're going to be, again, passing in 3 grades. So grade 1, grade 2, grade 3. All right. Now, I'm going to kind of do this in reverse order. The first thing I want to do is to see if any of these grades are invalid grades. So I'm going to be checking something with a condition that is an if statement. Multiple ways you can do this. You could compare each grade to 0 and 100. If any of them are less than 0 or greater than 100, then you obviously know something went wrong. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use some built-in Python functions. So I'm going to take the minimum of all of these grades, grade 1, grade 2, grade 3. If if the minimum of the grade is less than 0, then at least one of these is below 0. I'm also going to say with an OR statement the max of the same thing, grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, and I'm going to compare the max to be greater than 100. Remember, OR statement means that either side or both can be true and it will execute the code. So if any of the grades are less than 0 or if any of the grades are greater than 100, we are going to do this code, which will be printing out you entered an invalid grade. Okay, if we did not enter an invalid grade, this is going to be our else statement. We're going to be doing everything in step 1 and step 2 inside of the else statement. So I'm going to be creating some average, which is grade 1 plus grade 2 plus grade 3 divided by 3, since there are 3 grades. And now is when I'm going to start doing all of those comparisons. So if the average is greater than or equal to 0 and the average is less than or equal to 59, we are going to print F. We're going to copy this because, again, we're going to be doing this for all the other statements as well, but I'm going to be changing this to an elif statement. So elif, the average is greater than or equal to 60 and less than or equal to 69. Our letter grade is now a D. Copying this for C, B, and A. So down here on our third one, if our average is greater than or equal to 70 or less than or equal to 79, we are printing out a C. If we're greater than or equal to 80 and less than or equal to 89, we are printing out a B. And lastly, if we are greater than or equal to 90, we don't need an upper on this one. We're just going to say A. Now, this will cover all of our cases, but again, get used to using an else statement just in case something slips past you and you're not expecting it. say error in calculating average. All right, let's go ahead and test this. So get letter grade, passing it in 3 grades. Let's say 54, 89, and 50. All right, I do have invalid syntax somewhere up here. Okay, so in our min statement, I forgot a comma. I'm gonna fix that, but there you go. Okay, so our letter grade is D. I can't really see if that is the case or not. So what I'm gonna do right after I calculate the average, I'm just gonna print the average. All right, so you can see 64.3 is going to give us a D. If I change our 50 to be a 90, now we're up to 77, which is a C. If I make our last one 101, say you entered an invalid grade. So that's what we were looking for. And with that, that will close this one out. Let's go ahead and keep rolling through this. All right, dice rolls. So this function is going to simulate us rolling 2 dice and returning the sum. Now, to do this, we're going to be generating random numbers. There's different ways of doing it. Like you could use modulo to get some random number by doing division, but we're actually just going to use a built-in Python package, and that's going to be called random. To import packages, you're going to be using the import function. So import random. This is going to pull the random package down. Now we can start using some functions from it. So I'm just going to print to the screen random, that's our package name, .randint, that's our function. This is going to give us a random integer between 2 numbers that we pass it. So since this is a dice roll, our minimum will be 1 and our maximum will be 6. So this is going to give us a random number between 1 and 6. If I run this, you can see, and I keep running it, you can see our number will change between 1 and 6. All right, so go ahead, use this, create a function that will simulate 2 dice rolling and return the sum of those 2 dice back to main. Okay, I'm going to define our function called roll dice. Not going to be using any inputs here. Inside of the function, I'm going to be using what we had in our print statement, but I'm going to be saying our die1 is going to be equal to random.randint from 1 to 6. So our die1 is going to randomly generate a number between 1 and 6, copying that because we're going to have our die2 do the same exact thing. So each one of these generate a random number between 1 and 6, and all we need to do is return die1 plus die2 to main. So this is going to be called our roll, let's say, that's our variable, but we're going to call the function roll dice, and then we're going to print roll to the screen. Okay, if we keep running this, you can see our number will change, and it will be values between 2, which is our minimum, and 12, which is our maximum. So you can play around with that, but that is how you can use the package random inside of a function as well. All right, we're going to expand on that a little bit, and we're going to kind of be using the same logic here, but we're going to be using a magic 8-ball. So our magic 8-ball, if you remember using those as a kid maybe, you ask it a question, shake it, and it randomly gives you an answer. So define a function that's going to take in a question from the user, and then that question is going to be printed to the screen, and then you're going to randomly figure out what the answer is by using the same thing we did before. So up here we had our random number between 1 and 6. In this case, if you look down here, we need a random number between 0 and 7 in order to hit one of these the outputs. And then you're going to compare that random number and print out what the associated output will be. Hopefully you're able to track what I'm asking for here. Go ahead, take some time, come back, and see how we can do this. Okay, defining our function, I'm going to say magic 8-ball. And our magic 8-ball, again, is going to take in some question. First thing I'm going to do is print that question to the screen. Now we want to come up with whatever answer is. So our answer is going to be random.randint 0 to 7 because those are our options. Something important here. I did not import the random package because I already imported it up here. Jupyter Notebook and Jupyter Lab will automatically, if you imported it above, it will automatically continue down here. If you're not using those, you will need to import it again. So I'm just going to import it again. You can import it twice, that doesn't really matter, but just to get used to making sure my package has actually been imported before I use it. All right, so now that we have our answer, it's just a matter of using a whole bunch of if-else statements to come up with what our actual output would be. So if answer equals 0, I'm going to print, I'm just going to use a little arrow, and then I'm going to print whatever the value at 0 is, which is it is certain. Copying this statement here. Now I'm going to change it to an elif. Now elif, the answer is equal to 1. We're going to be printing the second one, which is it is decidedly so. Copying our elif, we have the value of 2, the value of 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. So just copy that down a whole bunch of times and then change these answers. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. And you just need to go ahead and I'm going to delete what's already there right now. After you delete all those, you can go ahead and use the list above to input what each are. So if it's a 2, we're looking at cannot predict now. If it's a 3, it's do not count on it. 4, my sources say no. 5, outlook not so good. 6, reply hazy. Moving down. 7 is signs point to yes. Okay, so let's test out our magic 8 ball. So I'm going to call magic 8 ball. Will I win $1 million? Okay, so that's my question. I'm passing it to the magic 8 ball. I will run this. Will I win $1 million? My sources say no. If I want to rerun this, it is certain. So you can see as you keep rerunning it, it's going to randomly pick one of those answers and output those to the screen. Okay, let's end this on a high note. Our very last one that we're going to be doing is calculating our interplanetary weight. So what is our weight on some other planet given our Earth weight? So make a function, takes our Earth weight in, but it also takes whatever planet we want to test out. We're going to do print the Earth weight to the screen, and then I want you to compare whatever planet you're using to this logic right here. So if it's Mercury, we are going to be multiplying our Earth weight times this factor right here. So Earth weight times 0.378 for Mercury. So you're going to do that for each one of these planets listed here. But I want you, if it's not any of these planets that were passed in, I want you to just say invalid planet. So go ahead, test that, see what you can come up with, and we will close this out. Okay, defining our function, I'm just going to call this get weight. Get weight is going to take our Earth weight, I'm just going to call that weight, and our planet, I'm going to call that planet. I'm going to print out Earth weight, and Earth weight is going to be the weight that we passed in. Now I'm just, again, going to do if statements. So if the planet equals Mercury, I'm going to assign a new variable called new weight is equal to weight times that factor. So 0.378. Copying this statement right here, making it an elif once again. We are going to be looking at the next one, which is Venus. If the planet equals Venus, it's going to be our weight times 0.907. Again, copying that 3 more times. So I'm just going to add those in right now. After Venus, we have Mars. Our Mars weight is going to be our Earth weight times 0.377. Next is Jupiter. Our Jupiter weight is going to be 2.36. Lastly, our Saturn weight is going to be equal to 0.916. Again, I'm going to add an else statement in here, but our else statement is going to assign new weight to be equal to -1, and then it's going to print out invalid planet. Now, there's a reason I'm assigning it to -1, and we're going to be looking at that right now. So, we need to print out what our new weight is to the screen, but if it's an invalid planet, then I want to not print it to the screen because we already printed our invalid planet statement here. So one final if statement we're going to be doing is if the new weight does not equal -1, remember, does not equal is exclamation mark equal, then we're going to be printing out our planet followed by whatever the weight is. So I'm going to say planet plus a colon plus, I need to convert the weight to a string in order to do string math here. But I'm going to say the planet colon whatever the new weight is. And finally, let's go ahead and test it. So get weight, let's say 170 Earth pounds on planet Mercury. All right, Earth weight 170, Mercury weight 64.26. Looking at Jupiter next. Earth weight 170, Jupiter weight 401.2. Lastly, let's check Uranus. And you can see that's an invalid planet because we did not include it in this list. So, again, just a whole bunch of ways of using functions. I hope you got a lot out of this. It's really down to how do we keep repeating this so it's kind of ingraining that logic so you can use it for whatever you're trying to do. And really, up until this point, we're learning if statements, for loops, functions. All of that is really 80% of what Python or any programming language is. Now it's all about how do we put those together in order to really do the logic that I'm trying to. So I'm going to stop here. We're going to be looking at classes in the next episode, so stay tuned for that. Again, if you haven't been following along, go ahead and take a second to go back and look at some of the things we've done. But for now, thanks for joining, and I will see you in the next one.